Hi, welcome to Bathtub. You know me. It's the old masturbator, also known as I'm the Marlon Perkins of literature. This is the Mutual of Omaha of book tubing, and we got a kind of quiet. We got a kind of quiet natural order right now. Dota's quiet. Lucky's in the other room. The beeping went on. No one's got upset. So it's kind of a nice sunny day here in California. One of those beautiful days in the Central Coast. And we'll hope everyone's kind of relaxing a bit. We're going to start a new reading project because we don't have enough reading projects here at the Bathtub. You know, I figure one of these, if I keep enough reading projects ongoing, I can never die, because I can't die until I've completed all the pointless reading projects I've set up here in my study here. And the new one is to read through Don DeLillo's work. I'm working on something about Don DeLillo, a writer I've kind of loved and hated for many decades now. It's been decades since I started to love him and started to hate him almost simultaneously. And I'm pretty much read most of his novels, and I'm rereading through them all to catch up. I have not read his last few novels. I kind of fell off the boat at Underworld. That's when I the dislike of DeLillo's work kind of overcame my great affection for his stuff. So anyway, we're going to start all over and try from the beginning. This is Americana. I'm kind of going back and forth between like my Wikipedia page because I can't remember. You know me, anything I tell you that's facts I get wrong. I originally read the first edition of this, which was 1971. It's his first novel. He wrote about a novel a year for many years, and they're all filled with intelligence and a great sense of humor. He's very, very funny. He's one of the funniest writers I've ever read, and most consistently funny writers. And I remember reading Americana in the first edition. I used to have the first edition, which I got rid of ages ago. And then I just read the 1989 version, which is, he according to Wikipedia, that's the only unimpeachable source in the world of literature, he did some cutting. It doesn't sound like he cut a lot, but he cut some pages. I pretty much would say that almost all of DeLillo's novels could use some cutting, and Americana could probably use even more cutting. But it's still, in many ways, the novel of his, I really do think, is his most funny and enjoyable novel to some extent, and his most exasperating. Both, they don't, enjoyable and exasperating, as far as I'm concerned, kind of go together with Don DeLillo. It is one hilarious paragraph after another. He writes beautiful sentences. Almost every sentence is a little unusual, has some sort of brilliance in it. Really, really funny scenes. But what he's great at is these kind of intellectual riffs his characters go on about especially about America and the meaning of advertising and the way the world works and so forth. And this one is about as disjointed and disorganized a novel. Basically, the central character is a guy named David Bell. It says on the back he's 28, so he's a youngish guy. He's a corporate guy and works in a TV network in New York. And the first half takes place in New York. It reminds me a lot of a book, and I'm going to get this wrong. Joshua Ferris wrote a book about being in an office. Okay, I should look this up so I don't. When we come to the end of something. I don't. Hold on a second. Joshua Ferris. His novel comes along a lot later. We came to the end. I remember enjoying this and reading it and thinking it reminded me a lot of Americana. The first half is just stupid corporate politics and the idiotic things people say and the jokes between the central character David Bell, who's basically, the joke is he's kind of really good looking and all the girls like him, but he's completely a loss. He has no real purpose in life that he can think of. And so the first half is this kind of weird corporate nightmare with a lot of humor in it, and it's a network, and they produce shows that no one would ever produce in the real world. And then in the second half, he goes off. He does a kind of avant-garde film where he travels around America like an Antonioni documentary, filming everybody and people just talking to the camera. And it kind of gets totally lost. I'd say the second half, I remember the first time I read it, kind of having trouble finishing it. And this time I had trouble finishing it too, because it goes off on some riffs that just go on forever. And they kind of lose their way as far as I was concerned. However, you cannot think of a funnier writer in terms of almost every paragraph. Most of you know him from White Noise, I should say. You know, there's a movie adaptation of it, which I couldn't watch, however much I like the director. And he did a book called Libra, which many of our bathing buddies love. I never could finish Libra. I found Libra just exhausting. And I liked the shorter the novel, the better as far as I'm concerned with DeLillo. I loved Running Dogs when I read it, and I loved Running Dog, and that was probably my favorite. Maybe one of the first books I read of his. Anyway, I'm just going to read you a couple passages just to give you a little flavor of this kind of continuous, intelligent comic genius of DeLillo. And this is where he's reflecting on office decor in American corporate life. His characters are always looking for signs and meanings, of course, which are never there. The door of Quincy's office was orange, and his sofa was dark gray. Some of us in Weed's group had doors of the same color, but sofas of a different color. Some had identical sofas, but different doors. Weed himself was the only one who had a red sofa. Weed and Ted Warburton were the only ones with black doors. Warburton's sofa was dark green, and so was Mars Tyler's door. But Mars Tyler's sofa was ecru, a shade lighter than Grove Palmer's door. I had all this down on paper. On slow afternoons, I used to study it, trying to find a pattern. I thought there might be a subtle color scheme designed by management and based on a man's salary, ability, and prospects for advancements or decline. Why did no two people have identical sofas and doors? Why was Ted Warburton allowed to have a black door when the only other black door belonged to Weed Denny? Why was Reeves Chubb the only one with a primrose sofa? Why was Paul Joyner's perfectly good maroon sofa replaced by a royal blue one? Why was my sofa the same color as Weed's door? There were others who felt as I did. When Paul Joyner walked in to find a new sofa in his office, he immediately started a rumor that he was being fired. But this sofa incident had taken place 2 years prior to the current rumor, the origins of which were never disclosed. He had not been fired. It was not that easy to find the connection. The connection was tenuous, but I was sure it was there. At least a dozen times I had taken that piece of paper out of my files and tried to correlate a man's standing with the color of his door and sofa. There had to be a key. If only I could find it. What I would do, when and if I found it, was a question that did not disturb me. I would do something. I would change something. I would have protection. I would know the riddle. I had Mexican food for lunch, Quincy said. The Mexican food at lunch is perfect. DeLillo completely changes the subject. I just somehow stupidly lost the passage of another passage I wanted to read. There's one section where he's talking on the phone about 2/3 of the way through the book, and he just calls all these people on his telephone. I'll be damned if I just lose it. Hold on a second. Yeah, here it is. There's one passage, he's off somewhere in Arizona or something, and he gets on the telephone, a payphone, and there's one phone call after another, which is absolutely hilarious. They don't really have any sort of narrative importance. I remember once reading an interview, he said he wrote his first novel, Americana. He just wrote pages, and his whole ambition was he had a toaster. He wrote as many pages as he could until he reached the top of the toaster. His pages were as high as the toaster, then he stopped. Every time I read DeLillo, I think of a toaster because it just feels like one funny scene, one funny page after another, one beautifully written page after another, and that's the entire arc. That's the narrative arc of Don DeLillo is a toaster. I'm going to read just a little passage. This whole 5, 10, 20 page scene on the telephone is one of the funniest things I've ever read. I mean, it's almost like almost every page is a line I would want to call somebody and just quote. And he's talking about getting on the phone. He says, I asked the voice of the switchboard to get me the network. So he's calling his office and talks to one of the secretaries. I'm naked, I said. How exciting. Who's with you? The Mormon Tabernacle Choir. Lucky them, Binky said. I didn't think you'd call again so soon. How old is Harris Hodge? He's always asking the names, the ages of all the guys he works with, and if they're younger than him, he hates them. And he does horrible things. He's always asking their ages. David, he's 26. Don't get mad. He looks older. Okay, how's Ted Warburton? He collapsed at his desk and had to be rushed to the hospital. You already told me that, goddammit, and I think you used exactly those words. When did you become a recorded announcement? I want to know if there's been any word from the hospital. I don't know. I'll ask around. Hasn't Weed tried to get in touch with Mrs. Warburton? I don't know, she said. Well, find out. Next time you're in bed with Weed, ask him if he's tried to get in touch with Mrs. Warburton. Use exactly those words. Do you think you can do that for me, Binky? Yes. I'm sorry, I said. So am I, David. I feel terrible about Ted Warburton. I really do. If you want, I can find out what hospital he's in and you can call him. No, don't do that. If Ted's really bad, I'd just as soon not talk to him. I can't stand talking to people who are really bad. Just find out how he is, and I'll call you next week. Anyway, the whole scene goes on like that, and the great pleasure in DeLillo is just to kind of go along for the ride on these great narrative riffs he has. It's very rare. I mean, I think possibly White Noise and possibly Running Dog have some semblance of a plot where you actually do follow through in the books, but most of the time I find them pretty aimless. Anyway, if you like Don DeLillo, you should read Americana. If you read Don DeLillo and didn't like him, I would recommend Americana because I do think it's his funniest and most quotable in some ways. I just constantly was writing emails and calling people to tell them read a paragraph out of this book. It's about it has a little of the we've talked a lot about Charles Portis, a kind of similar narrative sensibility where the paragraphs and the sentences and the hilarity of those paragraphs is much more important in the story. Portis has at least a thin semblance of a plot where you can kind of follow along a bit. But they're both equally kind of brilliantly funny writers. Okay, take care.